Hi there. I'm going to show you a quick and interesting little trick here. So the first thing I'm going to do is make a plane here in Max, and I can hide the grid by pushing the G key. So it's very important that I make this an actually perfect square, and the number of subdivisions I don't think matters too much, so you can just leave it at 4. And I'm going to convert this to an editable poly, go to face mode, and select the faces. Now your graphite modeling tool ribbon here may be hidden. All you've got to do is press this little arrow there and it'll populate that menu for you. So at this point I'm going to go to polygon modeling and then generate topology. So what this will do is it'll kind of convert this into this kind of a shape here. So what I'm looking for is a tiling texture. So I'm going to grab this sort of angled grid here, and you can see what it does there to the geometry. So we'll go ahead and convert that to editable poly, minimize the graphite modeling tools, and I'll make this gray color so it's a little bit easier to see what's happening. So now what we're going to do is grab all these faces and select the options here for the inset tool, and rather than having everything shrink as a unit, we're going to have it shrink by polygon. So now I'm going to do one more little inset here, and this one I just want to be a tiny bit, and this is going to be, I'll just sort of translate it down. So that'll give us our external mesh. In fact, I think I'm going to bring this in a little bit more, so there's a little bit more of an edge there. That angled edge is going to really stick out in the normal map, so we want to make sure that it's nice and clear. Otherwise it will be less obvious how thick this thing is supposed to be. So now I can go ahead and convert to an editable poly, and I'm going to go ahead and grab all of the faces and do an auto smooth. Now what you might have noticed at this point is it's not going to tile because it's got this edge around it, but there's a trick in Zbrush that I'll show you in a minute where we can kind of just grab the middle part which does tile. So, and there's probably a zillion ways that you can do this. This isn't the only way, but this is a way that I find is useful. So I'm going to go and add a turbo smooth modifier and turn on smoothing groups. Give it a few subdivisions, and what we can see is we're getting some webbing here, and the reason for that is all of these top faces are on the same smoothing group, but the inside corners are not. So what that means is we basically just have to go through and grab all of the faces like this to basically put the faces that are running this way on a different smoothing group from the faces that are running this way. So I'll just go ahead and grab these, and we'll do another auto smooth here. And now when I do the turbo smooth modifier, everything looks okay. Obviously the corners are screwed up, but again, that doesn't really matter. I think we do want to have a couple corners sharp, so just to be careful with that, let me kind of grab this edge and this edge, and this little section and that little section, and we'll do an auto smooth there. So hopefully this way, yeah, so we do want these corners to be preserved. Although I can see here I've got some issues along this edge, but again, I don't really care about that stuff as much because I'm only going to be looking at this inside section here. So now I'm going to add one more turbo smooth modifier to get this looking nice and smooth, and I think that's looking pretty good. So, and it's at an angle, so this is, let's see, what's the top view? So the pattern is running at an angle, which is what we're looking for. So I'm going to go ahead and export this. Got to make sure I've got it selected. So I'll do an export selected here. And I'm going to call this pattern plane HP and make sure it's set to OBJ. The default settings there are going to be fine. Okay, so here's this geometry. Now I've got to generate an alpha off of it, which I'm going to use Zbrush for. So let's hop over to Zbrush, and I'll just put a random piece of geometry there in the workspace to overwrite. I'll go to import, Okay, so there is my geometry, and what I want to do now is change my document size so that it is a square, which means I'm going to need to probably turn Pro off. That's going to keep a proportional setting, so if you change one, it'll update the other one. So I'll set this to 2048 and hit enter. You notice it doesn't actually resize, and it's actually pretty happy to leave that menu, but it keeps the setting. And I'll do 2048 there, enter, and then resize. It'll ask if I want to do this. It's not undoable, but I'm not going to break anything, so I'll hit yes for that. Hit Control N to clear the screen, and then draw my shape back on and go into edit mode. Now what I need to do is go to document and then zoom, and I basically just need to zoom out to the point where the whole thing is visible. So I can still rotate the camera and everything's pretty much the same. So now what I need to do is hit F, and what F will do is it will fit the geometry to the available space that I have. And you can see it's a little squishy there on the edges, but that's not a problem at all. I am going to give it one more subdivision though, just to kind of clean the edges up there. So again, all I did was make sure you've got perspective turned off on this, by the way. So I'm going to hold Shift, snap the camera, by just sort of dragging out here, it'll snap the camera to an orthographic view, so I'm looking straight down now. And if I hit F, the F key, it'll fit that geometry to the available canvas size. And now I can just go to Render, and then Render Properties, sorry, BPR Render Pass, and just hit this BPR button right here. Okay, so the render is done, and that doesn't take very long at all. I'm just going to go to that same menu now, Render, and what I'm looking for is the depth map. So all we got to do is click it, and then I will come over here and say Alpha 01, and now we can go to Photoshop and open it. So here we are. So the image size is going to be 2048 by 2048 because that's what I set my canvas to. But if I switch to the canvas size option and make it 1024 by 1024, it'll tell me I'm about to chop some of the edges up, but that's exactly what I want to do, so I'll hit Proceed. And now I have this. And we can double check to see that everything is tiling okay by going to Filter, Other, Offset, and then as we move this, we'll basically just scroll that image to the left or right, and you can see there's no seam there, and then we can do up and down, and also no seam. So I'll hit Cancel there, and I'll just overwrite that alpha file. So now we've got our tiling alpha, and you can get to this, you know, in a lot of different ways. It's just kind of the quickest and easiest way that I know to do it. So now we're going to go back to Max, and we can hide this. So now what I'm going to do is make a tube, and I'm just going to go ahead and go to the side view by hitting the L key. I'll turn G back on so that we can see what's going on with the grid. I'm going to create shapes and then line, and here in my options I'll just click smooth and smooth. So that will just give me a nice clean line, nice and smooth. And if I go to my modify panel here and I convert it, I'm going to do a right click and go to convert to editable spline. So this will let me see where my points are, and it's kind of important that they're more or less evenly spaced because they're going to get a certain amount of like cuts in them as you do the tube extrusion. So, and we can make this a little bit more interesting. We'll give this a rotate here. So I want to make sure that I am in world space. And this is set to center, so there we go. So there is absolutely no need to get yours if you're following along exactly like this. This is just kind of to give it a little bit more interest. So now I'm going to make another curve, and this one is going to be here in Shapes and Circle. So we can kind of put this anywhere, it doesn't really matter. Something like that. And then I'm going to do a convert to editable spline on this. I'm not sure if it's necessary, but in fact I'm going to make that a little bit bigger. Something like that. Okay, so now what we're going to do is grab one of these curves, go to the create panel, and then go to this little geometry section, and where it says standard primitives, we're going to grab that drop down and go to compound objects. And with the compound object, whoops, let me go back to where I just was. We can make an extruded shape here by lofting the circle along the curve. So I'm going to click loft, and now I've got my shape selected. So you can either get the path or the shape. So in this case, I'm going to click get path and then click my curve. Oops. We go in the other direction, so I'm going to grab the path and click get shape. There we go. So there's a few things that I want to do here. I've got a lot of cuts going around and I don't need that many. I like the density of the perpendicular cuts though, so that doesn't need to be tweaked. But let's go to skin parameters, and here where it says we've got shape steps and path steps, and I think shape steps is the one I want to modify, so we don't want to go too low with that, but that's probably about right. We want to keep it reasonably dense but not too dense. So that's looking pretty good. Now what I'm going to do is we can convert this. Actually, let's see. I'll do an editable poly. So if I add an edit poly modifier, I don't have to worry about maybe losing my curve in there. And I think if I convert it to editable poly, I might. So anyway, now that it's an edit poly, as far as the geometry goes, I can come in here and make some tweaks. Actually, I don't need to delete these faces. No, I'll go ahead and kill them. So now what I'm going to do is lay out the UVs, and it's very, very important that these are done in a very specific way. So we'll go open UV editor, and I'm just going to grab an edge and click this loop UV here. So now we'll break it. I'll go and hide the grid. So what I'm going to do is basically lay this out in as perfect a grid as I can get. But I don't want to distort the geometry too much, so I'll go to Tools and Relax, and we'll do this by polygon angles. You can see it starting to kind of work itself out there. You might have to do this a couple times. And if it looks like it's got a kink it can't figure out, you can drop down to the edge angles, and that might give you an okay result, but you typically, with the edge angles, you'll get these kind of like warbly corners here. So that's when the polygon angles comes in, because that'll resolve nicely. So it's got this curve to it, which is understandable because it's a pretty curvy shape, but I do not need it to be curved. It needs to be perfectly up and down. So what I'm going to do is grab this outside edge here and snap it vertically, and then freeze it by clicking this little whatever this is, a snowflake here. So this is the button that I hit to align it vertically, and I'm going to freeze it. So now that that one strip there is, or that one edge is frozen, if I do another relax, it's going to try to conform all of this geometry to the part that can't move. So now we're getting a little bit closer. I'm going to go ahead and unfreeze by clicking the snowflake and holding down, and then I'll go to the little fire icon here. And now I can just kind of run through and snap everybody so that they are horizontal, or vertical. So doing this is obviously going to result in a little bit of distortion, but I find it's typically not too bad. So now we'll just come through here and do the same thing. So I'll go ahead and pause the video and take care of these edges here. Okay, so there everybody is in a nice grid pattern. Now there are some other software programs, Modo and UV Layout, that'll do that for you automatically, and it's pretty great. But I don't think Max has that functionality. So we can take a look at what this is going to how this looks in terms of the distortion by turning the checker on and then selecting checker here in the drop down, and it's looking pretty good to me. Now the positioning of where you put your seam is probably important. If the tube is just going to be floating out in space, I guess you'll just have to figure it out, but for my purposes, I don't really care. It's probably not going to tile very well. So actually, you know what the best solution is we can just kind of scale it up. So because our pattern will tile side to side, so if we just make this edge here at 0, 0, 0, I guess actually this is only 2 axes, so 0 in the U value, and in this one we'll make this exactly 1 in the U value. The open edges here, we don't care about that tiling, so that's not going to be a big deal, but this should now tile perfectly around that seam. And I'll go ahead and do a convert to edit poly, and we can export this now as an OBJ. Whoops, should select it first. So export selected, and we're going to call this one tube. Now we'll head back over to Zbrush, and we can go to document and then just hit actual, and that'll resize the document. And I'm going to leave edit mode and then hit Control N to clear my workspace. And we'll draw another little star, go back to edit mode, and then overwrite that star by with our tube by importing it. So there we go. I'll give this a few subdivisions, and now the cool part happens. So the first thing you need to do is go to Surface and then click the Noise button here and turn on UV. We want to use the UVs here, and I'm going to go to Alpha, on off, and here I'll just click my alpha, and you can already sort of see it there, but we need to modify some of these settings. So let's make the strength a little punchier, and we'll increase the scale. Oh, you know what? It looks like I am breaking my tiling if I don't do this in whole numbers. Let's see if that works. Yeah, so maybe 0.5 will work too. Yeah, okay, so I think that's looking fine for the sake of the demo. Let me just kind of roll around it, make sure that it is tiling. So again, you just have to keep these in probably 0.25 and 0.125 and so on. Like cutting it down in half or doubling it would probably ensure the tiling is fine on that. So I'll hit OK there, and I'm going to give this one more subdivision, and there's this button here called Mask by Noise, and that is going to be what we want to hit next. So I'll hit Mask by Noise, and you can see it basically, wherever there is that pattern where it was distorting the geometry, now that's masked, but this is not nearly clean enough. So I'm going to hit Undo and give this a couple more subdivisions. And now when I hit Mask by Noise, it's much, much nicer. So that's looking good. So now what I'm going to do is go to the geometry menu. We can delete lower, and just for laughs I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this so that I have an original one laying around. Whenever you do anything that's potentially destructive, it's always kind of a good idea to just save off a pre-destruction state. So I'm going to go to edge loop, and then we're going to hit edge loop masked border, and what that's going to do is everywhere that it's masked, it's going to basically it's going to cut in a new edge loop. So we'll let that think for a minute. Okay, so now I can clear the mask, and if I hit Shift F, actually I'll just use the UI. If I hit polyframe here, and I think in the standard UI it's going to be over here somewhere, but once again the hotkey for that is just Shift F, we can see that I actually have a brand new poly group that's got pretty clean edges on it. So the next step here is just with this visible, and again for the, I don't know if I've said it earlier, but to control the visibility of the poly groups, once again to show them, I'm just have polyframe on, but I'm going to hold Control and Shift and just click. I got to sort of double check that I've got my brush, my rectangular selection brush, but that should be the default. So I'll just click in there and that'll isolate it. So now I can go to panel loops, and I'm just going to hit panel loops. My expectation is that the default settings are not going to be correct, but we can try. It's not terrible. In fact, that's pretty good. So let's kind of look at the panel loop settings. The thickness here is controlled by this slider here, and the depth, the thickness of this bevel here is controlled by this slider. So if I hit undo and I reduce this to say 25, what we'll get is a much tighter bevel there, but the thickness will be the same. So this is now a little bit tighter, but the thickness is the same. So I think that's totally fine. So what I'm going to do here is go to the subtool menu and go to split, and we'll do split unmasked points. So that's basically going to take everything that's not masked and put it on a new subtool. And I can hit, just go to isolate it by hiding the other two. And now we can turn perspective on if we want. So there's a pretty cool little shell that would be probably annoying to try to sculpt, but it's pretty simple with this little technique. And let's go ahead and just for laughs, we'll add some wires and some tubing to go inside that. So I'll hop back over to max. Now because whoops, it looks like I converted that to enable poly, but it's not a problem. If I hide it, I can see I've still got my curve in here. So I wasn't sure about that, so I added that edit poly modifier. So this is going to be my shape. So I'm just going to hit Control V to duplicate it, and then we'll shrink this copy down. So I'm going to keep the original around as a size guide. So Control V one more time, and can make a little bit of a smaller one there, and we can just do a little arrangement here, something like that perhaps. So now we'll attach these so they're all one shape, and it seemed to like the curve being selected first, so we'll go back to compound objects and loft, and now we'll do get shape. So there is our new shape. I'll go ahead and unhide all just to confirm, so we can see that this is going to be much bigger. So to modify that, basically I want these pipes to fit inside the other pipe. So I can expand loft and go to shape, and just I know it's down here because it's the start of the curve. So I can just come down and grab that shape, and as I modify its size, it should work pretty well. We can go perhaps a little higher and a little bit smaller still. Okay, so I'm going to hit Alt-Q to isolate it because I want to do one more kind of cool thing up here in the loft menu, and that's going to be in deformations, and that's here in the twist. I'm going to give it some twist. So we'll open that up. And as I move this, I should see a bit of an update here. So we can see that beginning to twist. So I'm just going to keep increasing that value and getting more and more twist. Okay, I think that feels about right. So we can close this and throw an edit poly modifier on here. So now I'm going to make everything, we'll just do an auto smooth, so that should handle these faces here. Just to make sure everything's nice and clean, we can do an inset. Give it a little bit of an inset, and then we'll do one more, and then collapse it, so that we, on this corner here, if you have a triangle touching it, you might get some artifacting, but if you've got a quad on that corner on both sides of it, it should be fine. Not that you'll see it, but it's just best practice. We'll do an inset, and then one more inset, and collapse. And now we'll add a couple turbo smooth modifiers. The first one will respect the smoothing groups. We'll give it 3 subdivisions, and the second one can just have 1. So we should get a pretty smooth surface here. So let's go ahead and export this. We'll call this one Tubes 02. And hop back into Zbrush. We'll append a Z-sphere. I'm sorry, one of these primitives here, and import Tubes 02. And there you go. So fairly simple. You know, maybe you could go a little bit thinner with this, or change the pattern, or have some kind of a something happening along the intersection here, and that would be handled very easily by setting that up in Max before you bake your map. But there you go. I hope you found this to be useful. Feel free to shoot me an email, or whatever. My email address is isaac.oster@gmail.com. Thank you very much.